Hi everyone, and welcome to this video on how to produce a writer's statement for a creative piece that you've written in English. So today we're just going to cover how to write an effective writer's statement in order to meet those criteria, and you'll need to make some dot points in terms of the audience, the text type, purpose and context, and the structural and language features that you've used. So what exactly is a writer's statement? Essentially, when you have produced your creative piece, whether it be a narrative or a poem, etc., all the decisions that you made were purposeful and for a creative reason. So now you get to explain them in your writer's statement. It is submitted with your creative piece, usually at the end, and you need to be able to show that you had a critical engagement with the creative process. So the fact that you've made this piece, all the decisions have been purposeful, you've really engaged with the construction of that piece and really explain the creative decisions you've made along the way. You need to show that you can analyze the techniques you've used, so rather than just list the techniques, you really need to be able to analyze and explain them, and you need to demonstrate a really clear understanding of who your creative piece is made for and for what purpose it is made for as well. Okay, so how long should it be? There is no hard and fast rule for this. Generally, we like to say that it should be about a quarter or less of your total word count. I guess the balancing act here is that too many words means that you have fewer words to use in your creative piece, and too few words, you're really going to struggle to meet that criteria. So a general guide, if you've got a 1,000-word piece in total, go for 700 for your creative piece and 300 for a writer's statement. But again, this depends on your task. So if you've created a poem, it's going to be very difficult to produce a 700-word poem and then explain all of your creative decisions in just 300 words. So for something like that, it's probably going to shift in terms of your word lengths. Okay, so what should you write about? Again, like everything we're going to talk about today, this will depend on the task and it will depend on the text type that you've chosen to produce. So you need to be able to show basically that you can use the conventions of the form that you've chosen to influence an audience. So I've given a few examples here for narrative. These are some of the things you can talk about, but essentially you need to demonstrate you've used these techniques for a reason and to have an impact on that audience, so to really make meaning somehow. Now, what should it contain? You should really be discussing target audience. That's an essential point there. You need to explain kind of what you intended to do with this creative piece. You then need to analyze and explain the structural and language features that you've used. Along with all of that, you then need to embed quotations from your creative piece to then support your explanations of those techniques. Now, number one, let's go into these in a little bit more detail. So what were your intentions? This is where the first thing that you write in your writer's statement really needs to be about what text type you chose, whether that be a poem, a narrative, etc., and what purpose that had. So we usually talk about purpose in terms of your to persuade, inform, or engage, but try and flesh this out a little bit more. So were you trying to make a particular political comment, or were you trying to mock someone or something in a bit of a satire? Were you trying to engage in a particular way or a particular genre, or make your audience feel a particular way? Once you've done that, so that's the top two here, you then need to explain your target audience. And it's really, really important that you had a clear understanding of this before you started and that you can pick out someone. So if your creative piece was put out into the real world, who would be likely to read it or watch it or pay for it even? So this could be their age, their interests, the kind of values that they have as a person, their personal experiences, what gender they are perhaps, and their education level as well as something good to comment on. The very last thing here is context. Now this is always a bit tricky to, I guess, explain, but this is when your text was made, what was happening in society at that time. You know, everything that you produce is informed a little bit by the society that you live in. So what is currently happening, what are people talking about, what's really controversial, what's relevant, and how has that informed what you've then produced? Okay, number two. So your next paragraph, you should really be explaining the structural features of that text type. So I've got quite a few examples here of different text types and some of the structural features that you could be talking about. And you really need to name those features and then analyze them, explain why they were used in the way that you used them. Okay, paragraph number 3. This is where you really get to the nitty-gritty of the techniques that you've used. So what were the language conventions of the form that you've chosen? So as I've said all along, whatever the form or text type you've chosen, that will really determine what techniques you then talk about. So for poetry in particular, you'll be talking about things like beautiful imagery and symbolism, onomatopoeia, five senses, alliteration, assonance, all those beautiful techniques that really show that you are engaging with that text type and really understanding how it operates and how to then impact an audience. And that's the essential thing here. So you need to demonstrate that not only you understand the techniques, but how they can be used to then make an impact on your audience. Okay, so how else can I write it? There are a few different ways to structure your writer statement. For poetry in particular, a lot of students write quite a short poem, and then their writer statement involves a really short introduction and then unpacking stanza by stanza what techniques were used and why. That's quite effective for a poem in particular. You can also do an annotated creative piece. So perhaps for something like a newspaper, if you're a very visual person, you can draw lines pointing to particular aspects, whether it be structural or language features in that article, and then analysing it along the side. Okay. The emphasis here, I guess, is not necessarily how you decide to structure the writer's statement, but to make sure that you're really analysing your decisions and not just listing them. So make sure that you go into a lot of detail, talking not only about the technique, but what purpose that was for and how that was going to affect your target audience. Okay, so quotations, this is another really important point. If you're writing a persuasive essay, you would always include evidence to back up what you're saying. And the same is true for a writer's statement. So if you're making claims that you've used symbolism to make an impact on the audience somehow, you really need to back that up with quotations from your work. So pull little aspects of evidence, I guess, from your writing and make sure you embed them in. So don't just grab a whole chunk and put it in, then analyze it. Really try and weave that delicately through your analysis. And if you're not sure how to do that, just have a look at this video called Incorporating Quotations, which is on my YouTube channel and ClickView as well. Okay, so how to write it. It's really important that you write it in past tense because you have already produced that creative piece, and this is you, I guess, reflecting on it and analysing it. The objective, you need to be objective is the second point there. So really take yourself out of it, never use I, and talk in third person. So you need to be writing in a way that completely takes yourself out of it. I've got an example here. So alliteration was used, and then and it was used to do something in particular. This avoids you slipping into telling your marker a bit of a story, and it avoids you talking about your feelings, which is what some students do, and is more at that C level in particular. So this is really clear, making sure that you're talking about techniques, analysing them, what was the purpose, and who was the audience for that as well. All right, so a bit of a summary. In terms of a writer statement, the most important thing, I guess, to note is that your writer statement will largely depend on the text type of your creative piece. Everyone's going to be slightly different, and you're going to be talking about different things depending on the form of what you've produced. It's really important that you engage with your creative piece as a construction, so noting that every decision made was purposeful and it was to have an impact on the audience, and that it was to really make meaning out of that creative piece you've produced. Also really important, don't tell your marker a story. So don't tell them about how you were feeling when you decided to write it, what you were doing that day, how you felt about the end result, and whether perhaps you were running short of time and so you decided to end the story quickly. Those have nothing to do with the text as a construction, so really steer clear of telling a story. All right, I hope this has helped to give you a better understanding of a writer statement. Good luck writing your dot points, and I'll see you in class. See you guys.